What if I told you that democracy isn't dying from dramatic coups or military takeovers, but from something far more subtle and dangerous happening right under your nose? Harvard professors Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt discovered that modern democracies don't collapse with a bang. They fade away with a whimper. And you might be unknowingly participating in its destruction. Hit that like button and subscribe right now, because I'm about to reveal the one thing democracy requires to survive that ordinary citizens have stopped doing, plus the ancient philosophical wisdom that predicted this exact scenario over 2,000 years ago. By the end of this video, you'll never look at your daily choices the same way again. You know what's really unsettling? When Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt wrote How Democracies Die, they weren't talking about tanks rolling through the Capitol or generals seizing power in dramatic coups. They were talking about something far more insidious: the slow, methodical strangulation of democratic institutions from within. It's like watching a healthy person gradually poisoned, where each day they look a little paler, move a little slower, until one morning you realize they're barely breathing. That's exactly what's happening to democratic backsliding around the world. And if you think it can't happen here, well, you're already part of the problem. But here's what'll blow your mind. Plato saw this coming over 2,000 years ago. In the Republic, he described how democracy inevitably slides into tyranny, not through violence, but through the very freedoms it celebrates. He argued that when people become too focused on their individual desires and stop caring about the common good, they become vulnerable to demagogues who promise easy solutions. Sound familiar? When citizens stop participating actively and start treating politics like entertainment, they're essentially handing over the keys to anyone charismatic enough to grab them. Plato wasn't being pessimistic. He was being realistic about human nature. What's truly chilling is how normal it all feels when it's happening. Levitsky and Ziblatt point out that today's authoritarians don't storm the palace, they get elected, then systematically dismantle checks and balances while claiming to represent the real people. Look at Hungary under Viktor Orbán. He won free elections, then gradually captured the media, packed the courts, and rewrote electoral laws, all while maintaining democratic appearances. It's death by 1,000 cuts, and each cut seems reasonable in isolation. You wake up one day and realize that while you were busy living your life, the very foundation of your society has been hollowed out like a termite-eaten house. Yet every time you check out of civic engagement, every time you say politics isn't my thing, you're participating in this erosion. Democracy isn't a spectator sport. It's a muscle that atrophies without use. The moment we start taking our democratic norms for granted is the moment we begin losing them. And once you understand how these sacred, unwritten rules actually hold everything together. Let me tell you something that might surprise you. The most powerful forces holding democracy together aren't written in any constitution. They're the unspoken agreements, the gentleman's handshakes, the simple understanding that some lines just shouldn't be crossed, even when you legally could. Alexis de Tocqueville understood this when he toured America in the 1830s, and marveled at how this young democracy functioned not just on laws, but on what he called habits of the heart. These democratic norms are like the social contract that keeps society from descending into chaos, invisible but absolutely essential. Think about it this way. Imagine you're playing poker with friends, and suddenly one guy starts bending the rules, not technically cheating, but pushing boundaries everyone else respects. Maybe he counts cards openly, slow rolls his wins, or celebrates a bit too aggressively when others lose. Technically, he's not breaking any written rules, but he's destroying the spirit of the game. Pretty soon, nobody wants to play with him, and the whole friendly game falls apart. That's exactly what happens when political leaders start eroding democratic norms. They might be staying within legal boundaries, but they're poisoning the well of mutual respect that makes the whole system work. The Stoics had a beautiful concept about this. They believed that individual virtue directly impacts the health of the entire community. Marcus Aurelius wrote about how our personal integrity ripples outward, affecting everyone around us. When leaders abandon the norm of accepting electoral defeat gracefully, or when they refuse to release tax returns, or when they attack the free press as enemies of the people, they're not just breaking tradition, they're teaching citizens that breaking norms is acceptable behavior. Consider how Trump's refusal to accept the 2020 election results didn't just challenge one norm, it gave permission to millions of citizens to doubt the entire electoral process. What's truly alarming is that most people don't even realize these norms exist until they're gone. You don't appreciate the referee until the game turns into a brawl. The peaceful transfer of power, the assumption that your political opponents are fellow Americans rather than enemies, the basic courtesy of not weaponizing government agencies against rivals, these aren't just nice-to-haves, they're the invisible infrastructure of democracy. And when enough citizens stop caring about participating in this delicate dance of mutual respect. Hannah Arendt had this incredible insight that still gives me chills. She said that the worst thing that can happen to a democracy is when citizens retreat from public life and become purely private beings. She called it the loss of the public realm, and she argued that when people stop engaging with their community and focus only on their personal lives, they create a vacuum that authoritarians are all too eager to fill. It's like abandoning a beautiful garden. If you don't tend it, weeds will take over, and before you know it, there's nothing left of what you once cherished. Picture this scenario everywhere today. People are more informed about their favorite celebrity's breakfast than their local school board elections. They can name every character in their favorite TV show but couldn't tell you who represents them in Congress. Aristotle called humans political animals, not because we're naturally scheming, but because we're meant to participate in the life of our community. When we check out of civic engagement and treat democracy like a Netflix show we can binge or ignore at will, we're literally going against our nature as human beings. But here's what should really shock you. In the 2020 presidential election, despite record turnout, only about 66% of eligible Americans actually voted. That means 1 in 3 people couldn't be bothered to participate in choosing their leaders. But it gets worse. In local elections, where decisions directly impact your daily life, turnout often drops below 20%. Every time you scroll past a political post because it's too depressing, every time you say my vote doesn't matter, every time you complain about politicians without actually knowing their names or positions, you're contributing to the very problem you're complaining about. Democracy isn't a vending machine where you insert your vote every 4 years and expect your preferred outcome to appear. It's more like a garden that requires daily attention, regular weeding, and constant nurturing. The founders understood this. They knew that democracy would only survive if citizens remained actively engaged. Real civic participation means showing up to town halls, joining community organizations, volunteering for causes you believe in, and yes, having difficult conversations with people who disagree with you. When citizens become passive spectators, they create the perfect conditions for democratic erosion. And speaking of difficult conversations, let's talk about what happens when we stop being able to talk to each other at all. John Stuart Mill once wrote something that should be tattooed on every social media platform. The only way in which a human being can make some approach to knowing the whole of a subject is by hearing what can be said about it by persons of every variety of opinion. But look around. When's the last time you had a genuine conversation with someone who completely disagrees with you politically? Not an argument, not a debate to win, but an actual conversation where you tried to understand their perspective. If you're like most people, it's been a while, and that's a massive problem for democracy. Something fascinating is happening. We've created these perfect little echo chambers where we only hear voices that confirm what we already believe. Your social media algorithm feeds you content that makes you feel smart and righteous, your news sources tell you exactly what you want to hear, and your friend groups probably think remarkably similar thoughts about politics. It's like living in a hall of mirrors where every reflection shows you how brilliant and correct you are. Feels good, right? But it's also incredibly dangerous because it makes you forget that reasonable people can look at the same facts and reach different conclusions. The polarization trap works like this. The more isolated we become from opposing viewpoints, the more extreme our own views become, and the more we start viewing people who disagree with us not as fellow citizens with different ideas, but as enemies who must be defeated at all costs. Take the January 6th Capitol riots. Those weren't necessarily bad people, but they'd been so isolated in information bubbles that they genuinely believed democracy was under attack. Mill understood that exposure to different perspectives doesn't weaken your beliefs. It strengthens them by forcing you to think more deeply about why you believe what you believe. What's genuinely tragic is that most Americans agree on way more than they realize, but political polarization has made it nearly impossible to find that common ground. We've been trained to focus on our differences rather than our shared values. We all want safe communities, good schools for our kids, economic opportunity, and a government that works for regular people. But instead of building on that foundation, we've let political entrepreneurs convince us that our neighbors are the enemy. And when citizens lose the ability to see each other as fellow humans deserving of basic respect and consideration, individual responsibility becomes more crucial than ever. Immanuel Kant had this revolutionary idea called the categorical imperative. Basically, act only in ways that you'd want everyone else to act if they were in your situation. Now, imagine if every citizen applied this principle to their democratic participation. What kind of democracy would we have if everyone engaged with the same level of thoughtfulness, integrity, and commitment that you'd want to see from your neighbors? That's not just philosophical speculation. That's the foundation of what Kant called our moral duty to society, something that might make you uncomfortable. You can't complain about the state of democracy while simultaneously refusing to do your part to improve it. Every time you share misinformation without fact-checking it first, every time you demonize people who disagree with you instead of trying to understand their concerns, every time you vote based on tribal loyalty rather than careful consideration of the issues, you're weakening the very system you claim to care about. Democracy isn't something that happens to you. It's something you actively participate in creating every single day. The beautiful reality about focusing on your individual democratic duty is that it's one of the few areas where you have complete control. You can't single-handedly fix polarization or stop the erosion of norms, but you can absolutely control how you engage with political information, how you treat people who disagree with you, and how seriously you take your responsibilities as a citizen. Consider someone like John McCain. Even when facing intense pressure from his own party, he chose to uphold democratic principles over partisan loyalty. You can choose to be informed rather than just opinionated. You can choose to listen more than you speak. You can choose to see complexity rather than demanding simple answers to complicated problems. Think about it this way. Every generation inherits democracy from the previous one and has to decide whether to pass it on stronger or weaker to the next generation. Right now, what kind of democratic citizen are you modeling for the young people in your life? Are you showing them that citizenship means thoughtful engagement and respectful dialogue? Or are you teaching them that politics is just about picking a team and hating the other side? Your daily choices about how to engage with democracy aren't just personal decisions. They're building blocks for the kind of society we'll all live in tomorrow. And if we want to rebuild the democratic character that seems to be slipping away, Aristotle taught that virtue isn't something you're born with. It's something you develop through practice, like a muscle that gets stronger the more you use it. He called these virtues of character, and he believed that a healthy society depended on citizens who cultivated qualities like courage, temperance, justice, and practical wisdom. Now, apply that same logic to democratic participation. What if we thought about democratic engagement not as a chore or a right we can choose to ignore, but as a set of skills we need to actively develop and strengthen throughout our lives? Consider what democratic virtue actually looks like in practice. It's the intellectual humility to admit when you don't know something, the courage to stand up for principles even when it's unpopular, the patience to listen to viewpoints that challenge your assumptions, and the wisdom to distinguish between reliable and unreliable sources of information. These aren't abstract ideals. They're concrete skills you can practice every day. When you fact-check something before sharing it, you're exercising democratic virtue. When you engage respectfully with someone who disagrees with you, you're strengthening democratic norms. When you vote based on careful consideration rather than emotional reaction, you're contributing to good governance. But here's what gives me genuine hope. Character development is contagious. When you start modeling better democratic behavior, the people around you notice. Your kids see you turning off the partisan talking heads and seeking out more balanced information sources. Your friends observe you asking thoughtful questions instead of just spouting talking points. Your coworkers notice you bringing the same integrity to political discussions that you bring to everything else in your life. Look at how Václav Havel helped rebuild democratic culture in Czechoslovakia after communism, not through grand gestures, but by consistently modeling the kind of citizen a democracy needs. The ancient Greeks had a concept called paideia, the idea that education wasn't just about acquiring knowledge, but about developing the kind of character that could sustain a healthy society. Every time you choose thoughtful engagement over tribal warfare, every time you prioritize truth over convenience, every time you treat your political opponents as fellow humans rather than enemies to be destroyed, you're participating in the kind of character formation that democracy desperately needs. The question isn't whether democracy will survive. The question is whether you'll be part of its renewal or its decline. Let's recap what we've uncovered. Democracy dies slowly through eroding norms, citizen disengagement, dangerous polarization, and abandoned individual responsibility. But it can be renewed through daily practice of democratic virtue by people like you. Democracy isn't dying because of some grand conspiracy or unstoppable historical force. It's fading because too many citizens have forgotten that democracy is a verb, not a noun. It's something you actively do, not something that just exists around you. Every single day, with every choice you make about engaging with information, treating people who disagree with you, and taking your civic responsibilities seriously, you're either strengthening or weakening the democratic fabric holding our society together. So when you look in the mirror tomorrow morning, will you see a citizen actively participating in democratic renewal, or someone who's been sleepwalking through one of history's most critical moments? There's no middle ground anymore. Your disengagement isn't neutral. It's a choice with consequences for everyone around you. Pick one area where you can begin practicing democratic virtue starting today. Maybe it's fact-checking before sharing, having one genuine conversation with someone who disagrees with you politically, or showing up to a local government meeting. Start small, but start somewhere. If this opened your eyes, smash that like button and hit subscribe. We're building a community that refuses to accept the decline of thoughtful discourse and democratic engagement. What's the one change you're making this week to become a more engaged democratic citizen? Drop a comment and let me know. The future of democracy isn't in politicians' hands, it's in yours. What are you going to do with that responsibility?